Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. So that's really what we're talking about. That all month long we've been talking about not just having financial prosperity, which is part of our teaching too, that we can use divine creative energy to create a world that works for us at every level. But we also talked about how relationships, having healthy, supportive relationships is one of the ways that we experience the abundance of living. And then last week we talked about cultivating those experiences where we're not asleep to our own lives, where we're connected to that wonderful aliveness, really, that God has for us. And today we're talking about our vocation, our work, our contribution, which may seem counterintuitive because you think about prosperity as I'm going to get something, and we're going to talk about giving something as a way of achieving and experiencing abundance and prosperity. But before that, I have to tell you about another kind of a minister in a different kind of a church. He felt that people were acting a little bit too full of themselves, out there making choices for their own self-expression in a way that didn't quite line up with his opinion, and that they needed to be brought back down to size. So he was going to give a hellfire and brimstone sermon, and he gets up in front of his church and he says, "Every member of this church will die and face judgment." See, you laugh when I do it. You know me better than that. But that congregation, they hung their heads a little bit. Except for one guy in the front row who just smiled. Thought maybe he didn't hear me. The preacher said, "Every member of this church is going to die and face judgment." People are just hanging their heads, except for the guy in the front row who just beamed, just so happy. He thought, I'm going to give it one more try. He came off the platform, looked him in the eye, pointed his finger and said, "Every member of this church will die and face judgment." Nothing. The guy just continued to smile, so happy. Didn't even get to him. So the preacher gave up, went on, took the offering, closed the service. At the end, he made a beeline for this man. He said, "Did you not hear me? I said that every member in this church is going to die and face judgment." He said, "Oh, I'm not a member here." Woo, lucky. That's not the God we preach. We don't preach the God of judgment and condemnation. We preach the God of love and creativity, a God of connection and oneness. We see that there's a spark of the divine in all people, that we are here to cultivate that spark within ourselves, to shine our light. As Jesus said, we are the light of the world. So one of the ways we do that is through our contribution, the way we give of our time and talents and expertise out into the world to the benefit of the whole. Because what we're actually after, in a sense of seeking abundance and prosperity, is fulfillment. Not fulfillment, as Michael Beckwith says. It's not about acquiring more stuff. If I get that husband, if I get that car, if I get that dollar amount in my bank account, then I will have arrived. It doesn't work that way. That is a bottomless pit of acquisition. What we're talking about is a sense of bringing our gift fully to bear in the world and receiving the benefit of having all of our needs met. That's fulfillment, where we are in the flow of divine good. David Brooks is a New York Times columnist and an author, wonderful writer, and he had I guess we'd call it a breaking open a few years ago, the end of a long marriage and feeling isolated and alone. He He came to understand some things differently about life and community and connection. And I've been hearing interviews and seeing him talk about this and thought, I need to get that new book he wrote, and kept putting it off. And then finally, I didn't say this to anyone, but a member of our community gave it to me. And it was sitting on my desk. I was like, I guess God really wants me to read that book. The name of the book is called The Second Mountain. And it speaks to exactly what I'm trying to talk about today. We are an individualistic culture. Our teaching arises out of that individualistic culture, that we are here to uniquely express and experience life individually. All of our work, our healing, our transformation happens on an individual level. But as with anything, if we push it too far in one direction, something gets out of whack. And what David Brooks is saying, that we have done that we've lost some of the fabric of social connection and mutual support. We don't have it like we once had, and it may be time to come back into an awareness of this. And he talks about that there are two mountains. And he said the first mountain is the one that our society just loves to applaud and see people do it. It's people that achieve and acquire and attain. And so we spend a lot of energy in our life to rise to the top of that mountain. And he says that what happens there is that we feel full, but we're not fulfilled. And so something else is required. And sometimes it's a loss, it's an addiction. Something will knock people off that first mountain, and they're in the valley. And then a second mountain, which is about greater community connection, greater service. And this is what he says. This is in the introduction to his book. If I can pull it up here. That's the crucial way to tell whether you are on your first or second mountain. Where is your ultimate appeal? To self or to something outside of self? If the first mountain is about building up the ego and defining the self, the second mountain is about shedding the ego and losing the self. If the first mountain is about acquisition, the second mountain is about contribution. If the first mountain is elitist, moving up, the second mountain is egalitarian, planting yourself amid those who need and walking arm in arm with them. We have a purpose statement that we created last year. I'd love if we could bring that up on the screen and we can read that together. Our purpose, together? In community, we nurture and empower each other, transforming our lives that we may serve the world. When we talk about giving and receiving, sometimes we think it's an either or. And it's not. They're one and the same. It's stepping into the flow of divine creative energy and love in our lives. And when we do our own healing and recovery work, when we release those false identities and self-restricting and limiting thoughts, we step into the greatness of who we are individually. At some point, we recognize that we are here to give our gift to benefit the whole. And we don't do so from a sense of obligation and burden. Howard Thurman was an amazing writer and minister. He was a mentor to Dr. King and others, and he said it this way: don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And so we as a community, we heal and we grow. We nurture and empower each other to come alive so that then we can give our gift and serve the world. Amen? And it doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be grandiose, preferably not. But it comes from an authentic place of that flow of aliveness, of energy, of generosity. And it doesn't deplete us. It actually enhances our experience of abundance, of connection, of having our needs met at every level. Each of us is uniquely called and equipped. We had our wonderful spiritual education enrichment week this week, and we had dozens of students here on our campus going deep into our unity practices and principles. And a lot of them are feeling this call to greater service, some in the path of ministry and some in the path of licensed teacher, but this idea of calling was up for a lot of us. And people are talking about what that means to be called. And what often happens is like, well, they're people who do that, they're different from everyday folk. We ain't. I'll just tell you. Terry Cole Whitaker has a great book. With her book, sometimes you just need to read the title and you got it. She says, every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. No perfect people allowed. But you will need to change and to heal and to grow in order to more freely give your gift. And so what I kept reminding my students this week was, God does not call the equipped. God equips the called. That the very journey that you will take in training and in becoming and in healing will give you the gifts you need, so when it is time for you to step into that role, whether it be a minister or whatever else that is, you have all you need to give your gift fully. And the growth and the healing does not end upon ordination, I'm here to tell you. The healing continues at a deeper and deeper level so that we become more and more alive, giving our gift in a way that benefits others, and we are fulfilled. The Apostle Paul wrote about this. You all know that I struggle sometimes with, got a little bit of a love-hate. That's not really what I want to say, but, here's the thing about Paul. He was working within the Jewish community of the first century, establishing a new faith tradition following the teachings of Jesus Nazareth. So he had to write some rules. Some of those rules made sense to his audience in terms of women keeping silent in the church. I'd like you to try that at a Unity church and see what happens. No, thank you. We're not doing that. And so a lot of his letters, they're kind of like rules, here's how you ought to do it, and then he'll just slip into this mystic state of connection and power and wisdom, and that's what 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is. He gave my sermon is what he did 2,000 years ago. He says this, starting with verse 4, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone is the same God at work. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one, there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom. To another, a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit. To another, faith by the same Spirit. To another, gifts of healing. To another, miraculous powers. To another, prophecy. To another, distinguishing between spirits. To another, speaking in different kinds of tongues and languages. And to another, still, the interpretation of tongues. And all these are the work of one and the same Spirit. And he distributes them to each one, just as he determines. God doesn't use cookie cutters. You're not meant to look like anybody else. Your gifts are not meant to be shaped like anyone else's. You are meant to discover and deliver the authentic self, as Rumi says. And that's the work. And we can't just discover it, we got to then give it. Because there's something needed. And sometimes we get this idea, like I said, that I got to be better than I am in order to help and serve. And no. Right where you are, exactly as you are, at this level on your path and of your spiritual discovery, you are required, needed, necessary, invited to be a part of some healing in humanity. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is one of the great transcendental philosophers, and our teaching, Unity, definitely has roots going back to those guys in the 1800s in America, and he said it this way: the fact that I am here shows me that the soul had need of an organ. Shall I not assume the post? The fact that you're here means God needed you to be here. And there's something that's being asked for from you in terms of being generous with your gifts, your time, your love, your forgiveness, your kindness. Something. We are in the midst of this Grow Unity initiative. We're very excited about that. Internally, it does indeed mean grow our church, but really the bigger picture is we're seeking to grow the experience of unity and love in this city. And so we're finding partners, and if you would like to nominate an organization or a leader, that there are forms available in the lobby, but you can also go to our website, unityhouston.org. We're going to be interviewing 100 leaders in this city. And I've done a few of these now myself, and on Wednesday, I had one on my calendar. I was like, I'm not sure what this means. I told John, I don't even know why I'm having this meeting. It was with the president of TransStar. They're the traffic camera people. I'm like, how are we going to find any, the Venn diagram, the place where they overlap? I'm like, I cannot see any place where Unity of Houston is going to have any overlap with TransStar. But Jackie Lyles, whose company we're working with on this initiative, she put it together, and she knew and had worked with Dinah Massey, the president of that company, and Dinah was willing to meet with us. I'm like, okay, we'll meet. And in the conversation, the interview, some of the questions are beginning to kind of open something. And then we start talking, and I said, I've been talking about this on Sunday mornings, that I believe that the Houston freeways are a spiritual graduate school. That somehow when we're inside of our little protective armor, our car, we are like all spiritual principle and kindness and compassion flies out the window. And she said, it's not an armor, it's a weapon. And I was reminded of a story. My friend Megan McDonough, who is a songwriter of the song that I sing, Amazing Friends, she co-wrote that song. She lives in Chicago. This was years ago. Her son was 2 or 3 years old, and they're driving somewhere in Chicago traffic, and her son is in the back seat, and they're late, and there's traffic, and her little boy can tell that she's stressed out. And he says, Mommy, are you angry? And she said, no, honey, I'm not angry. I'm just frustrated with all this traffic. And he says, but aren't we traffic too? Think about it. Yeah, and that's it. Because all those other people are just in my way, but I am going somewhere. Not to the person behind you, you ain't. You're just traffic. And then they said, well, maybe we could do that. They were both just, Dinah and her communications director, they really loved that idea. And they said, maybe we can partner on doing some kind of a video or a PSA or something. And there were a couple other ideas we kind of tossed around. But it really kind of opened something up in me and what's possible. What if we could take these teachings of love and kindness and compassion out into the Houston freeways? Really? You're laughing like it ain't possible. I'm telling you it is. It is possible. And we're going to start with them, right? Because I believe if you could write a spiritual book on how to change others' minds and change your life, that would be the way to do it. Where do we start? We start with ourselves. And that is where the work is, and that is where the answers lie. And we do it together. Maya Angelou, just a great soul, she said this: we need joy as we need air. We need love as we need water. We need each other as we need the earth we share. That's not traffic. That's your brother and your sister. I've been really inspired by teaching with stories lately, and there are a lot of them from the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. And then this morning I want to bring a story from the Cherokee tradition. I do have lineage through my father's side. Both his mother and father have Cherokee ancestry. And my grandmother did introduce her grandchildren to that to a degree, but I really don't have a direct connection to this lineage. But I was studying and looking at the story I'm about to share, I was struck by a couple things. The Cherokee, it's said, that traditionally did not use physical punishment on their children, but they taught and they corrected with stories. And this is one of the stories that the grandmothers would, or the grandfathers would tell to the children who were acting a little selfish, to remind them that we do this thing together. Chief Sky had been a wonderful chief to his people. Through decades, he had led them in times of peace and prosperity. He knew how to guide them to the right hunting grounds and the right gathering places, and had been in peace with the other people around. But he was getting old. He was old. And it was said that he could no longer see the buck in the brush. He could no longer hold a steady hand to the bow, and he knew it was time to choose a successor. And so he gathered 3 of the strongest and wisest young warriors from his tribe and brought them before him, and he said, "It is time that I select one of you to become the new chief. And there is a task which I'm going to ask you to accomplish, and that will help me decide." And he stretched out his arm, and he pointed to a mountain. He said, "Do you see yonder mountain?" And they followed where he pointed, and they saw, rising out of the mist there in the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina, this rocky peak. And he said, "I want you to travel to the top of yonder mountain and bring back to me what you find there." So the 3 young warriors set out. The swiftest of these was Black Bear, and he got to the trailhead first, and he climbed about halfway up, and it was still just mid-morning. He decided to take a rest, and as he was lying with his head upon a rock, something glinted in his eye, and he looked over and he saw surrounding the trail were these beautiful, sparkling stones, crystals that reflected the light so beautifully. He had never seen anything like it, and he had a thought. He said, "I could use these to help my people. We could barter with the other people for food, and we would never be hungry in the winter." And so he gathered up the 2 handfuls of the crystals, and he hurried back down the mountain and brought them to the village. The people gathered around to see what he brought, and as he presented them to Chief Sky, he said, "Look what I have found on yonder mountain. These beautiful stones that will help us stay fed. We can use them to trade for food." And Chief Sky's eyes lit up, and he placed his hands on Black Bear's shoulders and said, "You have done well." The second warrior, his name was Gray Wolf, and he climbed past the place of the shining stones, and the trail became steeper and more difficult to climb, and so he struggled a bit on the rocks, and then he came to a place where the ground opened up again, and to his delight, there were some of the herbs that his people used to heal, all kinds in great abundance. There was snake root, there was the elm bark, and he knew that this would be a great gift to his people, to bring it back to their healers, all the herbs they would need, and the people would never struggle with sickness again. And so he gathered a sample of each of the kinds of plants there, and he came back down the mountain and into the village. Once again, the people gathered to see what he had brought from yonder mountain. And he presented these herbs to Chief Sky and said, "Look what I have found for our people. We will suffer no more. Plenty of herbs for our healers to heal your people." And again, Chief Sky placed his hands upon his shoulders and said, "You have done well, my son. Thank you for the gift you are bringing to our community." People began to look around for the 3rd brave warrior to come back. His name was Soaring Eagle, and he did not return that day, or the next, or the next, or the next. And the people began to fear that something had befallen him. After 6 days, they came to Chief Sky and said, "Soaring Eagle must have died in this quest. He is not returning home. You must choose our leader from these 2. And he said, "We will wait one more day." As the sun was beginning to set and the shadows lengthened on the 7th day, Soaring Eagle struggled into camp with his clothing torn, his feet bleeding. And he collapsed at the feet of the chief with empty hands. And he said, "Chief Sky, I did as you asked. I climbed yonder mountain. I climbed to the place of the shining stones, but I was not yet at the top. I climbed further. I climbed past the rocky, hilly place to the place of the plain with the beautiful healing herbs, but I was not at the top. I climbed further." And he said, "The trail gave out. I was climbing hand over fist through rocky cliffs. I was torn, I was bleeding, but I arrived at the top of yonder mountain and looked around for something to bring back, and there was nothing there but barren rock. But I have a story that I need to bring to you." And the chief said, "Tell me your story." Said, as I looked around, I saw for miles beyond what I'd ever seen before. And off in the distance, I noticed a trail of smoke. And then I noticed that it was intermittent, that it was a signal from some other people. And the signal was, help us, we are dying. Chief Sky, we must gather our warriors and we must take food and medicine to them. We must help these other people. And the chief was so moved by this story that he placed his hands upon the shoulders of Soaring Eagle, raised him to his feet, and turned to the people of the community and said, this is your chief. A man who is moved by compassion to serve others. What does that teach us about community? We live in a time of great division, ideologically, politically. The haves, the have-nots. The gulf between is so great. And we need leaders who will rise up and say, no, we are one. We are one people. And we are here to not extend judgment and exclusion, but to extend compassion and inclusion. To remind us all that we are one humanity. This is what we're about. The thing I love about that story is that it was not a contest to be won. The other two warriors brought great good to their community. You are charged to bring something. It may seem small to you, but it's not. You are uniquely gifted. There's some way that you're seeing things that we need so that we can be of the greatest service to our world. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what the next chapters of this community's life looks like, but I do know this. We are called to bring this compassionate perspective, to see all people as God's people. I saw a sign on a church that said, we may be excluded for the people that we include, but that's who we are. Something is happening in this community. There's a poem I'd like to read to close from that great fount of wisdom, Facebook. It went by once, I didn't copy it. I thought, I missed it. I'd like to find it. And it came by again. God is good. This is called Small Kindnesses by Danusha Lamaris. I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers will still say, bless you, when you sneeze. A leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill your lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will stop to help you pick them up. Mostly we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and have them smile back, for the waitress to call us honey as she places the bowl of clam chowder before us, and for the driver of the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of one another now, so far from tribe and fire. Only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy? These fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat. God bless you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.